Addiction to Purpose with Riches in Recovery welcomes you to our audience. We hope that you enjoyed today's show and will join in the discussion by dropping a review or comment. It would be tremendous if you would like, rate, and share our content, or even subscribe to our channel. Please be aware that not all conversations on this show are suitable for children. Additionally, we may talk about things such as sexual abuse, domestic violence, and drug or alcohol abuse. If you feel that these things may trigger you, please do not tune in. Finally, if you are a heavy daily user of alcohol or drugs and are considering stopping, please consult a medical professional for assistance. Welcome to the conversation. Hi, welcome to this week's Addiction to Purpose. This week we're starting part one of a two-part series called Relapse Happens, but it doesn't have to. Relapse is not uncommon in the world of addiction and recovery. In fact, it's part of my story. It does not have to be part of the story, and that we're going to save for next week. We'll have a guest that comes on and speaks about how relapse was not part of her story. But for this week, we're addressing how relapse does happen, and we've got a guest coming on that is going to speak to how relapse happened in his story and how it impacted his recovery. What I want to stress is that if you are in relapse or coming out of a relapse, that you can recover, that you have every chance to recover, that you are not abnormal or hopeless. And, most of all, that you don't have to do it alone. That if you reach out, that your recovery community will be there for you, and that there are helping hands that want to lift you up and help you be on your way. Hi, so I'm Rich, and the big guy in my corner, the guy I call when I'm feeling squirrely, the other Rich.
And I'm Rich.
And today we're joined by my buddy Ryan. I've gotten to know him a little bit over the last couple months. Ryan, introduce yourself and share your sober date with us.
My name is Ryan. I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 19th, 2017.
Nice job.
Very cool. And for our grateful backdrop, can you share something that you're grateful for today?
I'm literally grateful that I'm not sitting in jail or dead.
That is definitely something good to be grateful for.
Those are kind of the other two places you could be at.
Right.
So, Ryan, like I said, it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last few months. And so what I'd like to start off for the purposes of today's episode is just kind of tell a little bit about your story, kind of like you would with a group share or something like that. Just kind of share, what brought you to today in your recovery.
Sure. I don't know. I pretty much, I want to kind of go through my attempts at getting sober more than anything else.
This is kind of about, today is kind of about relapsing.
Since we're talking about relapse.
Yeah, it does happen to us alcoholics.
It does happen to us alcoholics, My first, I kind of started getting loaded like a lot of teenagers do, someone with friends and, at school. And
were you like everyone else, like didn't quite fit in?
Right.
Once you started drinking, then you fit in
exactly.
with everyone.
I started smoking cigarettes with the kids across. I actually graduated from the DARE program with honors. I don't know if you remember the DARE program? Yeah. Nice. I was never going to do drugs because drugs were bad, okay?
Right.
Just
was
wasn't
that
gonna
the one that Nancy Reagan started?
Yeah. I grew up in that era and was never going to do drugs. I knew drugs were bad. I knew drinking was bad. My grandparents were alcoholic. My dad drank quite a bit, but he was always able to really, control it, maintain. So I'm not sure that he was an alcoholic, but he had warned me that it runs in our genes.
Mine too.
It was something I was never going to do. But I felt like I didn't quite fit in. I had trouble making friends. I usually had a few, but I just didn't fit in. And I started smoking cigarettes with the kids across the street, and then they started talking about how fun drinking was. So it sounded like a blast to me.
Yeah.
My first time drinking, I'll talk a little bit about that. I don't often talk about it, but my first time drinking, I was sent to my grandparents' house for the weekend, and they had literally a bar in their living room, and with all stocked with alcohol, and they had, cases of beer in the garage. So I was like, I'm getting drunk this weekend. Grandma and Grandpa go to bed at 9, and Grandma had a pitcher of special orange juice in the fridge, right? So I'm like, as soon as they hit that bed, I was right to that fridge, pouring a nice big tall screwdriver out of Grandma's pitcher, and grabbed 2 Coors out of the garage, and I chugged them all down like really quick, and I lit a cigarette, and suddenly I felt cool and loved and funny, and I was all by myself.
Yep.
Right? But I had found the magic elixir, and I remember right then deciding I wanted to feel like that forever.
Yeah, so, next party you were going to, you knew what to do.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And so, when I got back to school, it was all hands on deck. I was full bore on a mission. I let all my school go to the wayside. I was a straight A student, and I went quickly to a D and F student very quickly. Started getting in trouble with the law, and my dad was an attorney in Marin County, so the first time I got in trouble with the law, it was like, oh, we'll just go down here and sign some papers and you're good to go, and so I got the assumption that, like, I'm never going to be in trouble with the law,
And your folks just let it slide too?
No, the first time I was on probation. I don't know how I passed that probation because I didn't do anything with it. But my brother got in some trouble and he was forced to go to AA meetings. So my dad kind of sent me with him, in hopes that something might stick.
How old were you then?
16.
16.
Yeah, 16. So that was 30 years ago. That I went to my first AA meeting.
Nice.
I didn't have any intentions of getting sober. At 16, none whatsoever. And it wasn't until I was 18 and my dad threw me out, and like 2 months later, I have a long list of charges, and I'm sitting in jail with a long list of charges, and I knew, they had just passed laws that if you have drug or alcohol problems, you have to go to rehab, So I said quickly, I'm an alcoholic because I didn't want to spend time in jail. So I sent me to my first detox, or my first rehab. And I think I was 5.5 months into a 6-month rehab when some of the older guys in the rehab.
6-month rehab?
It was a 6-month rehab.
To start off with.
Yeah.
Nice.
Instead of, in lieu of jail. So, I was in 5.5 months into the 6-month program. I figured I could get away with smoking a little bit of weed. And I got caught immediately, and there's relapse 1. Right? Relapse number 1. And, almost immediately, I got kicked out and almost immediately got arrested again and went thrown back in jail.
But you were fitting in, though, because of the...
Well, yeah, because the older guys at the rehab were, like, getting away with it and that kind of stuff, so...
That's just, that's so relatable for me because, I have a lot of not yets, but I also have, so many times where I would just step slightly out of line and immediately get caught. It was just
every time. I
was dealt.
I roll it till the wheels fell off, but every time my runs were months, not years.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. That's how hard I go. Right.
I'm the guy who never got caught doing anything.
Yeah, you guys. Man, I don't know how you guys do it, man. I went hard. The only reason I never got kicked out of my parents' house was because my dad knows the law. And I've become a ward of the state. And my dad didn't want to do that to me, so he hung on as long as I could. The day he turned 18, he booted me and said, "You're on your own."
Yeah.
So then suddenly I found out that I'm not immune to the law. But so they sent me back to rehab after that second go around. They sent me another one, and I barely passed this one by the skin of my teeth. And I moved back in with my parents. They allowed me to move in after rehab, and I started going to AA meetings in Marin. And there was a bunch of kids that were having a lot of fun, and I was like, okay, well, I'm hanging out with these kids and going to a bunch of meetings, and we're going to coffee and dances and dinners and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, I can hang out with these kids, and I felt like I fit in. We all did the same stuff, and we're all sober. Half of us are in trouble with the law, the other half are in trouble with their parents.
Nice.
I'm we
got both.
Yeah, we're all like kinds, and so I was working for my dad, and I got my own place and got a car and got stuff to put together. I'm 19, 20. I turned 21 sober. I was planning on drinking. I had a plan. I was going to go get drunk, and my friends threw me a surprise birthday party. So I couldn't go drunk on my 21st.
Your sober friends?
Yep, my sober
Right.
friends.
Surprise!
Surprise birthday party. I had plans to go get drunk. I was going to sneak away and go get drunk that night.
That's pretty cool of them.
Yeah, they did. And I lasted a couple more months after that. And I had a girlfriend who had 3 days more sober time than I did. And we took a trip to Mexico with my dad. And it was just me, her, and my dad. And I wanted to party so bad. Like, they're all at the club. The nightclubs are going off. And I can't say that it might be in my head. I might have been imagining, but the girls are like, "Oh, Blanco, come party with me," you know? Like, I just wanted to party so bad, and I didn't have any solution. And I knew AA kind of had worked, and so I went and looked for AA, and I saw the circle and triangle in Mazatlan, and I went and knocked on the door, and they said, "No, it's closed." And I was like, "Well, that's that. Like, I got nothing, you know?" And I went and found somebody that had some weed. I snuck out of of the condo, and I went and found some weed, and I smoked it, and my fiance caught me later that night, right? And so she was like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I was like, "Well, I'll just start over. I'll get sober again." And thus began this attempt to try to start over, and I could not stay sober. So I'd go maybe a week, and then somebody would invite me to a party, and I'd end up drinking. And then I'd go maybe a couple of days and smoke some pot, or it was just really, then I got back into meth, and she was like, "You're done, like, bye." And I was off and running again.
Mm-hmm.
Again, within days, I was out of my place to live, lost my job. You know what I mean? Like, within days.
It comes down hard.
It came down hard, and the wheels fell off pretty damn quick. And so, I mean, that run, I got this RV and was trying to maintain. I ended up getting busted again, and went back to jail again. And fortunately, they gave me another shot at rehab. After I showed them that I had done well for a couple of years, they were like, "All right, well, you get one more shot."
So rehab number 3.
So rehab number 3, and so in there, as part of my time sober in that, rehab number 3, it was actually more of a sober living environment than a rehab. I went to a
SLE.
30-day program and left, and then went to an SLE, and I stayed at that SLE like 2 years, over 2 years, and I became house parent and manager and stuff like that. But
cool.
As far as the sponsor that I had, I kept the same sponsor that I had previously, and he was not into a recovery program, as far as the big book or doing steps. He was not big into, people, we call those kind of people book thumpers, book, the people that thump the book. And he was much more of a fellowship guy, and we went to all these meetings and different events and drag shows in San Francisco, sober drag shows, and all these crazy different events. So that my second go around lasted almost 3 years, and I'm going to all these going with all these kids to conferences. I was going to the young people's conferences all around the country, and on the way back from Portland, we were driving back, and my buddy was telling me, we're driving through the cornfields on I-5, and he's telling me about the anhydrous ammonia and how he used to cook meth out of anhydrous and this and that. And I was like, "Oh, cooking meth, huh?" I'm like, "You know how to do that?" And he's like, "Yeah." We hatched this plan that we were going to start cooking meth sober, because you can't get high on your own supply.
So it's going to work.
If we're sober, we can get away with this. We'll become kingpins, and these people it was only a couple of days later, we're back in my apartment, and somebody had some pot. We started smoking some weed. And the next day, I think, we started drinking. And then that night, we're like, "Let's go to Mexico." So we just packed up the car. We called in sick to work, drove to Tijuana, and got faded. And all I remember from that trip was a chick poured tequila down my throat, blowing a whistle. And I woke up on the beach by myself in Rosarito. I don't... So there's relapse, number 4 or whatever, and in there was some outpatient rehabs that I had to go to, and other little classes. Every time I mess up just a little bit, they'll make me go to this class or that class, and never got DUIs. I was always more serious, like burglaries and stolen cars and stuff like that.
But you never got a DUI?
I never got a DUI.
Oh, see, that's good.
No, never got a DUI. I got caught with a lot of times with like paraphernalia charges, and like possession charges, little stuff, here and there. But then that relapse, after I got back from Mexico, again, I had lost my job. My roommates, my girlfriend and my roommate didn't want me there anymore. They kicked me out. And so like within a day of coming back, I didn't have a job and was homeless again. And that run lasted probably 6 or 9 months. I tried to continue to cook meth and like just do all this crazy stuff. And I ended up with some stolen cars out of Marin County. I ended up stealing a car out of Sonoma County. Got a burglary and a stolen car out of Sacramento. And then I got out of Sac County and was going to go to another rehab and try to stay sober in Shasta. So I went to this rehab halfway house in Shasta. And I ended up finding somebody. They were like, "Oh, you just got out of jail. Well, here's a needle and some dope, man. Have fun." And like there goes another relapse right off the bat. And I tried to kind of control it and stay sober there. I started going to some AA meetings up there and trying to do the deal. And it just wasn't cutting it, and I ended up stealing another car off a dealer lot up there. And I got busted for that. And they were like, "Look, man, you're on probation in Marin, Sonoma, and Sacramento. We kind of can't give you probation again, man. We're going to have to send you to California State Prison." And I was like, "Well, no, wait. That's not supposed to happen to me."
Yeah, I don't deserve that.
Yeah, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Marin County attorney's kid does not belong in Marin County or in California State Prison, and so, man, I was scared to death. I did not like prison, but I hung with the Christians. My mom had become a Christian, and so she was telling me that I needed to focus on Jesus, and I was like thinking, well, the 12 steps are supposed to lead you into a spiritual awakening. I was like, well, why don't I just go straight to Jesus then?
Yeah.
Right? And so I started studying the Bible, and I started hanging out with the Christians, and I was like doing worship and like doing Bible studies and leading things like that in prison. And when I got out of prison, I managed to make it. I had 4 years and some change. I got out of there, and I was just going to do the Christian route and stay celibate and sober and just, do my thing. And I ran into an ex-girlfriend who led me astray in the sexual arena, if you will, and like we started dating, and she was just out of this really bad relationship. And then she got murdered.
Wow.
Her ex beat her to death with a baseball bat.
Wow.
And man, I did not have any solution for that. I copped a resentment against the God that I had been worshiping.
Sure.
I didn't want to mess with that God anymore if he would do something like this when I was trying to be good. And I had this pretty self-centered perspective. How could you do this to me?
Right.
Kind of attitude,
That's good alcoholic perception.
Yeah, and the same buddy that I had, hatched the cooking meth plan came with me to her candlelight vigil that night, and he had some weed on him, and we smoked some weed, and I was kind of back off and running, but I was on parole, so I didn't want to go balls to the wall, and I stayed away from the hard stuff as much as I could, and I was allowed to smoke weed on parole, so I kept this to like smoking some weed and drinking just a little bit, just enough so that I wouldn't get caught. But I would smoke weed all day, every day.
Yeah.
Certainly wasn't medicinal use.
Right. Yeah.
Did that help at all?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so what I've come to discover is that alcohol and drugs aren't the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They've always been my solution.
Right.
And so here I go back to this solution. And the next couple of years I spent I formed a reggae band, and we were playing this reggae music for the next few years. And then towards the end of my parole, I managed to do pretty good. I did catch one more charge while I was on parole. I got into a fight downtown, and they ended up giving me probation on top of parole. I got super lucky. But I ended up killing that whole period. I didn't do anything serious enough to get another violation. I managed to get off parole. Well, the day I got off, the next morning we were on a plane back to Mexico for my sister's wedding. Right now, my sister had 75 people at her wedding in Mexico. Big, nice penthouse suite. We had cocaine out on the table. We were drinking margaritas. Just ball. I'm like, chains are off. Let's do this, right? Here I go again, and they can't get me now. Like I'm in Mexico. But the thing that was different about this trip is my sister had this roommate who was a kid I went to elementary school with. So I've known him a long time. And he'd been renting a room for my sister. And this guy was a sober member of AA, and he was sitting in the middle of this party while we're all drinking and doing drugs, and he's sober and enjoying it. And I was like, how the hell is this guy doing that? Like, that was not my experience before, like Mexico. I mean, you want to talk about triggers. Mexico was always a trigger, that was always like, oh, this party town, like, let's party. And here this guy
I've never been there sober.
Yeah, well, here this guy was in the middle of this party, like, peaceful and happy and joking, like, just part of the whole deal. And I'm like, so over the next couple of years, as my life progressed downhill, drinking got worse and worse and worse, and the hard drugs found their way back into my life, and I got married 6 months after my sister. And, I was trying to kind of stay sober there for a little while, but it was, I was back in and back out. And I think during that period, I had like a bucket of 30 and 60 and 90-day chips that I'd tried. And then I managed to scrape together 1 year in there somewhere. You want to talk about relapses, though. This is like a whole period, that whole time that I was on parole. And after that, it was all like in, out, in, out, in, out. And I'd do things like go to little, 10 a.m. book studies with old ladies so that I'd like, wasn't in the fellowship, you know what I mean? And like hide out kind of stuff. But so as my life got worse, cocaine found its way back into my life. I started shooting cocaine, and I'm married, trying to hide shooting cocaine from my wife and kid. And
Good luck.
Yeah, oh, dude. And I'm surprised at how long it lasted, to be honest. Because that was not an easy task. And, it finally got to this place, I just didn't want to do it anymore, and I've been promising my wife I was going to quit, and I wanted to be a good, upstanding, husband and father to my stepdaughter, and like, I just couldn't manage. I didn't have any money, I couldn't hold the job down, I kept getting fired and laid off from these law offices and holding these piddly little, $15 an hour jobs. I'm never going to support a family like that. And been promising I was going to quit. And as my life kept getting worse and worse and worse, this dude that was living with my sister, his life was getting better. And I don't mean that he was like getting a better job, because he still works in the same place. He's still, still 7 years later, 8 years later, still lives with my little sister.
Yeah.
Like, hasn't changed anything from the outside appearances of his life, but he's peaceful and happy and content. And I'm like, this dude has tapped into some kind of magic.
Goes a long way.
I was like, I need what this dude's got, and I finally came to this place where I have been coming back to AA, and I've been coming back to meetings, and it hadn't been working. And I finally told my wife, I think I need rehab, I need a break, I need to get out of here. And went to detox and went to rehab, and I got kicked out within a week, And I remember, though, when I left the detox, I walked out, and there was literally like a bar or liquor store and a smoothie shop, like right when I walked out of this rehab. And I was like, ah. And I remember standing outside of it, and I don't remember how, but I know I ended up a few minutes later with a smoothie in my hand. And I was like, and my wife came and got me, and I was like, all right. So then I called this guy that was going to sponsor me, and we started working the steps, and I started going to meetings. But I had I had harvested a bunch of weed, so I had like 8 pounds of weed that I had to trim and sell sober, and I managed to do it. And I had also just started a photo booth business. I had just started a new small business that I was trying to get off the ground. And, I think I made it 8 or 9 months before one night I was driving back from this event in San Francisco by myself, and I had a little bit of weed shake left, and I was like, oh, maybe I can roll up one blunt, and I'll smoke just one blunt, and I won't tell my wife, I'm not going to tell my sponsor, it's just weed, like, no big deal. So, but I remember pulling off the freeway, going to get a blunt wrap for this thing, and I remember thinking in my head, and I replayed this later with my sponsor, my head was telling me, you're not being too smart. Like, I felt it deep in me. Like, you are not being very smart here. But my head was like, it's only one blunt. You're fine. You'll be fine. Like,
but
it's
you
just weed.
Feel it here, though.
Oh, I felt it here. For sure. There, I was wrestling with it big time. Well, I did it, and I smoked that one blunt, and I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning, and I started searching for this needle that I had stashed somewhere, and I called the coke dealer, and I'm back at the liquor store on the way to the coke dealer's house, and I was off and running for another 6 or 7 months, and man, that was not part of the plan, you guys. Like, that was not part. I was just going to smoke one blunt. So, so that run, I kept this little prayer journal from prison that, every time I really got down into it, I'd write in this prayer journal. And I got to this place where I wanted to stop and I could not, and I'd write in this prayer journal, I hereby swear I'm not going to do this tomorrow. And then I'd do it again the next day, back at the dealer's house, back doing it again.
Right.
And then the next day, I hereby swear I'm not going to, please God, don't let me do this again tomorrow. And I do it again the next day.
3 o'clock the next day.
Right? Do it again. And in my journal, I have it still today, 5 days in a row of me saying that I'm not going to do this again tomorrow. The last day, I'd actually cut my thumb and swore it in blood that I wasn't going to do this. And I did it again the next day.
Oh.
And that brought me to this place of absolute, like, hopelessness and despair. Like, I got this moment of clarity where I'm just going to keep doing this forever, and I'm going to lose everything again, and I'm going to go back to prison, and I'm going to lose this whole life that I've built, and it's just going to be a never-ending cycle, and I have no way off this. And I was trying to get into detox. They were full. My rehab, my insurance wouldn't pay for me to go back to rehab again. I've been too many times. They're all like, I guess 9 times is too many or whatever. It didn't work. So I started thinking, like, what kind of crime do I got to commit to get locked up for 30 days? I'm like, maybe I could 150 myself. And then I thought, well, what's the point in all that? Why don't I just end it? Why don't I just there's no use. Like, I'm just going to, I went and bought 2 grams of coke. And I stuck it all in my arm within a few minutes. I filled it up as much as I could, and fully expecting that it was going to give me a heart attack and I'd die. And I didn't. And I was sitting out in my little garage office, and I was high, but I was still in a lot of pain. And it was not taking away the pain. It didn't work. And like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, my little daughter walked out. She was 9, and she looks at me and says, "Daddy, are you okay?" And I just broke down. I'm like, "No, baby, I'm not." She came over and gave me this big hug, and I knew in my soul that I'd never get loaded again, and I don't know why, don't know how, but like the next morning, the detox had called me back and said they had a bed available, and I took it, and I only went to detox for 3 days, but I called my sponsor and told him he actually took me to detox, and he said, while you're in there, spend this time studying that book, and so I did. I started studying that book, and started actually paying attention to it, and I finally realized that I am one of these people. I'm not any different than I'm not special. I'm not going to figure out some kind of special solution.
You're not smarter than the alcohol.
He had asked me if I'd ever followed all the directions, and I had to admit that I had not followed all the directions. I had always, I'd always heard this phrase, take what you like and leave the rest. And I was like, yeah, that's my deal. That's my jam right there, And I had never, followed all of the directions, And so I began to give it a full shot and follow all of the directions. And that's what I'd have to say. If anything I've done different, it was that. Just surrendered completely to the steps and to the program because it works.
It does.
It works.
There's something magical about those 12 steps when you put them all together.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's, my story in a nutshell with the relapse, and relapse happens. And I used to beat myself up a lot. And I want to talk about this one story because, so when I was in my younger youth, coming around when I was in my early 20s, I was sponsoring a couple of guys, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd sponsored this guy, and we did a 5th step up at a camp out at a retreat, men's retreat, I was sponsoring him for a little while, and then I relapsed, and I tried to take him out with me. Oh. And when I got sober this last time, I had gone on that retreat, and he was there. And he said, "Hey, man," he He's like, do you remember trying to take me with you on your relapse? And I was like, no, I didn't remember that, you know? And like, I remember the relapse, of course, because that's the one that sent me to prison and had long been my biggest mistake, right? In my life. That was my biggest mistake. If I'd never relapsed then, I wouldn't have 9 felonies. I wouldn't have the, prison. I wouldn't have lost it, et cetera, et cetera. But he goes, for the longest time, I was upset at you and I had a huge resentment. And then I realized that your resentment or your relapse probably saved my life.
Mm.
And he was like, because of your relapse, I went and got a new sponsor and I doubled down on the steps. And I started working on them hard. And since then, I've sponsored hundreds of guys in the last 20 years. And so your relapse may have saved hundreds of lives. And I was like, whoa. My perspective of things just blew wide open right there. And here was like this thing that I was looking at, my biggest mistake in life may have actually been a net positive in the grand scheme of things, right? Yeah. I'm like, who knew? I could have never, ever seen that. And I thank him for showing me that.
God's working in a weird way there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. It's an acceptance that I had already started to get to, but I was actually reading in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions this morning, and it spoke to it that that acceptance that the things that happened in our lives sort of had to happen so that we could go on to help people through what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does help me to look back through. Because I had a lot of the 1 week, 2 week, 1 month, 2 month, 3 month relapses, like so many of them over the last few years, but that experience is going to help me help somebody else that's doing the same thing. Yeah,
and that's exactly what I can tell somebody that is in this relapse cycle. It's like just surrender completely and give your all.
Yeah.
And I couldn't go back to rehab. And so my sponsor made a pretty good suggestion that I would, if anybody else is in this position that can't go back to rehab, he said, well, you've been to rehab enough times. You know what they do there. I was like, yeah. He's like, why don't we structure your life just like rehab? So you get up early in the morning. You go to a 6:30 in the morning meeting. You do some prayer, meditation in the morning. You go to this morning meeting. Then you go home. You get something to eat. Right? Then pull out your big book, maybe set aside a little study session, maybe get a little workout in, join a gym, get a little workout. Then he gave me a website, recoveryaudio.org. Here's 6,000 speaker tapes. Why don't you play a speaker tape? Why don't you look up some YouTube videos on addiction? Why don't you go to a noon meeting, get some lunch, right? There you go. Go get some more physical exercise or do a fun activity in the afternoon. Maybe do some light reading or something else. Get back to and then you do an evening meeting and you do dinner and you go to bed and you do the same thing the next day. And so for like my first 6 months, I was literally, my life was structured just like rehab.
That's genius.
I was going to morning, noon, evening meetings. I was doing book work and my step work in between. I got a gym membership, was going to the gym every day. I started riding a bicycle in the afternoon, I literally just structured my day like rehab. I remember going horseback riding with another dude. We're like, hey, let's go horseback riding. I don't know where, take a drive out to the beach, whatever,
That sounds like rehab.
That's so smart.
And, because we have like an Alano club here that has 3 meetings a day, it's easy to do that. And I'm pretty sure no matter, now they have Zoom 24-hour all day long meetings. You can literally be in meetings
you don't have
to
miss anything.
But I really found a lot of benefit in switching it up and listening to speaker tapes, and doing study on my own, like
those speaker tapes, they helped me through COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many good ones.
Yeah, I went through the Joe and Charlie book study tapes.
I went through all those.
A couple of times, even, and like started looking for other study groups. And because I finally began to realize that the solution was written right there in the book. That's why they wrote the book, because here is what works, right?
Yeah.
We wrote it down because this works. And, if it was left to be word of mouth, what happens with the telephone game?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, passed down over generation, that stuff gets changed so much, and so much other information. And, today in these programs like AA and NA, I feel like we have so much rehab talk, that's not AA.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And as long as you do those 12 steps as they're said, and you do them in order, and you really, really do the work. You don't half-ass it, but you really, really do the work. You listen to your sponsor, who listen to their sponsor, because they have all that knowledge as they go along. There's so much stuff passed along by their grand sponsor, and you do them as you go along, and it's like magic. It really does work.
Yeah, particularly steps 10 and 11.
Yeah.
So
important.
They're daily. They're like a daily.
Every day.
This is a way of life. This is what we do in the morning, and these couple of pages that are outlined. My sponsor really had me do that right from the beginning, like as part of my daily rehab routine.
Yeah.
Here's what the book says. You do this in the morning, you do this in the evening. And he was really one of the first guys I'd ever really seen that was like, okay, I'm going to go hang up and go do my meditation, my evening review, and go to bed now. I'm like, well, you actually do that? I didn't know you actually do that.
Yeah, I do it. That was one of the first things I taught him to do.
Just didn't know. I didn't know. I don't hear it talked about in meetings. You don't hear people mentioning like, oh yeah, in my evening review last night, I discovered I was being really selfish and so. You don't hear that.
Evening review
Nobody
every
talks
night.
about that.
Yeah, you do it, and it for me, that evening review, it finishes up my day, and get all that stuff out of my mind that I might have done incorrectly, anything that I might, have to make amends to or anything like that, any work or anything like that I might not have gotten taken care of from the day, I get that out of my head, and so my head's clear. I've got it written down, so when I start off the morning, I start thinking of that stuff that I needed to take care of, add on a few things that I need to get done, start off my morning with a clear path to get things done, and it makes that day start that much easier with my prayers and meditations for the next day. Boom, gets me rolling.
Actually trying meditation.
Meditation.
Like I had already thought that was like for the gurus.
Yeah.
And that one day I might get there, and like I have too ADD. I can't.
Yeah, that's what everyone says.
Yeah, everybody says that, and I fell victim to that, and early in my recovery, I had to work this reggae festival, like with 60 days sober. I'm like a 3-day reggae festival. I had to go work at it, right? I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. So I brought my sponsor with me, and we're walking through this festival, and he says, oh, I'm feeling a little disconnected. I was like, oh, what are we going to do now? And he walks over to this bench, and he sits down, and he sets a 5-minute timer, and he just closes his eyes.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's live music going on, all kinds of people. I'm like, how the hell are you doing that right now? And like, I sat there and just did it with him, and I'm like, wow, you can just stop and break and meditate any time of the day or night, no matter where you're at. And I was like, wow. So I began actually just using it as a tool. And it was difficult at first. My brain races everywhere else. And a lot of times I like to look at it today as like allowing my brain 5 minutes to race so that it's not racing when I'm trying to do other shit.
Yeah. I think the way to look at these things too is that all of these things are practice, right? Like these are
practice.
these are all practice, right? And the more that you practice something, the better you're going to get at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the other thing to really mention is that whatever your program may be, we're obviously all strong believers in the 12 steps of AA or the 12 steps of NA, if that's your program. But there are other programs out there. But the one sure thing is that if you don't commit 100% to whatever you're doing, it's likely that you may not get the results that you're looking for. You said something. I've heard your share a few times, and you said something one time that really struck me, and it kind of the take what you can use and leave it behind. Well, you said it like this. You said that that you don't look at it as a program of suggestions,
Yeah.
but instead as a suggested program.
Yeah, that's.
And I love that phrase because I was like, oh, that's so
Suggested
true. You know,
program.
it's not.
I heard a speaker.
It's not separate
Yeah.
suggestions.
No.
It's a suggested program.
Yeah, there's
you
a
know?
big difference between the two.
Big difference.
In all my little speaker tapes that I listened to, that was something that they said, you know, and one
That
of those
sounds like a
things that I
Charlie
picked up.
something said.
Yeah, it was one of those. It's a suggested program,
Yeah.
not a program full of suggestions.
Yeah.
And really, I feel like a spiritual solution is I think it's key because so we talk about having the physical allergy to alcohol and drugs. Like we know there's a physical addiction there, right? Yep. Then we also talk about this mental obsession, right? But what underlies that, right, is that there's a problem with me,
Yep.
like right with my spiritual condition. And we talked right at the very beginning about not feeling like I belonged. Not feeling like I fit in, and that's a very common thread. Right?
I know it seems like everyone, one of the first things they do when, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no.
But everyone, one of the first things they do when they share is to say, I just didn't feel like I fit in.
It's super common.
It just, it felt that way, and when I put alcohol in me, I fit in.
So what that tells me today, I like to describe it like this: is that you could like me if you liked me, it was only because you don't know the terrible things that I've done.
Yeah.
And if you find out about those things, then you wouldn't like me anymore. But if you didn't like me, it's only because you don't know what a great guy I am. And let me show you. Right? But I can have that feeling at the very same time in a room full of people, and not feel comfortable. And what that speaks to me is a spiritual problem. I'm not comfortable in my position where I am right now in the world that surrounds me. Right?
Yeah.
And once I become to be okay with who I am and what I've done, and that's why the steps help out a lot with that. We'd go through our 9th step and we go and make amends. And I know today that I can look back and say, I've done my very best to fix everything that I've ever messed up.
Yeah.
So I have no more shame and guilt about it. I've done everything I could possibly do to fix it. It is what it is, and what's done is done. All I can do now is do better today than I did yesterday, right? And move forward every single day.
That clean house is beautiful.
Right?
Yeah.
No.
So I did have just a couple of questions that kind of pertain to this subject. The first one is, do you have a set of triggers that are kind of always on your radar, things that you look out for that could start or lead you down the road to relapse? I know you said you're a little over 7 years now, but are there still some things that you're like, always keep an eye out for this?
So the funny thing, if you read this chapter, the chapter more about alcoholism, they give a couple of descriptions in there. And we have Jim, who was having kind of a rough day, right? And he was kind of having a rough day. It wasn't terrible, but he suddenly got this idea that if he mixed whiskey with his milk, he'd be okay, right? And he got this idea that he could take a drink, right? Yeah. Then, towards the end of the chapter, we have Fred. Now, Fred was a different kind of a guy, right? For Fred, it was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon for Fred.
Yeah.
And he still got this genius idea that he could have a couple of cocktails with dinner. Wait a minute. So if there's a bad day or if it's a good day, that thought can still occur. Sure. So for me, I looking back, and you talk about the word trigger, I think that's another one of those rehab words that pops into AA.
For sure.
And it's one of those, I don't know that there is such a thing as a trigger. Waking up was a trigger for me. I don't know,
I did.
Today, though, I red flag, like to call them red flags, maybe, warning signs. And when I'm really irritable on a regular basis, my wife will point it out to me. Yeah. If I'm frustrated a lot. So those are maybe some signs that I'm not doing my day. And it usually happens to be that after I haven't done a couple of days of meditation, or I haven't been to a meeting in a few days, or I haven't been doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I tend to get a little bit more frustrated in traffic. Traffic's always a good red flag, man. If you're pissed off at the other drivers all the time, there's something the matter with your spiritual status.
Yep.
Right?
I call myself on that all the time.
If I'm upset at everything, a little thing that's going on around me, that's my first red flag. How frustrated am I? Right? If I'm feeling frustrated and upset and irritable constantly, it's a big red flag.
No doubt.
Right? So I don't know that it's necessarily a trigger, because my trigger can happen at the end of a perfect day. But if I'm resentful and I'm, upset most of the time, and it's just happening on a consistent basis, that's kind of a red flag that I'm probably not spiritually fit.
A little out of sorts.
Like the book is talking about, is that if we maintain spiritually fit, my higher power takes care of the rest. Like my higher power is the one that plays the tape through for me.
Yeah.
My tape doesn't fucking play. My tape says it's going to be different this time. You're going to be all right. You can handle just one blunt. That's what my tape says every single time.
Big guy upstairs.
But when I stay close with my higher power goes ahead and says, no, you don't want to lose everything. Like that's where this is going to go. And I begin to listen to that gut feeling that I felt when I was going to the grocery store and to get that blunt wrap. I get that now.
Yeah.
Right. And I get to hear the voice of God, and I know what that sounds like now. And it's not this wild and crazy, yeah, man, you can go do this, blah, blah, blah. It's not what that sounds like. It usually sounds like, Ryan, you know what you got to do. And it's usually something I don't want to do.
Right.
What I call mine is I run into my God wall.
Yeah.
Just boom, you hit the God wall, you ain't going past it.
Yeah.
The other one is, do you have a relapse prevention program or protocol? So, is there a set of rules or actions that, you fall into?
Yeah, so relapse prevention is another one of those rehab words that
100%. Yep.
Yeah. The relapse
Fill that out
prevention
before you
program
leave.
is written out in the book.
Yep.
It is the 12 steps.
Yeah.
Particularly pages 84 through 88.
Yep.
Steps 10 and 11. And it's a daily practice. And my sponsor did
30.
show me, this little 10th step paragraph where it talks about continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And then it gives us a little program of action, what to do when these crop up. We ask God at once to remove them. We make amends quickly. We talk to somebody about it immediately, make amends quickly if we've harmed anybody, and then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. That is the quick 10th step, and it has never failed me.
Yep.
Every single time I find myself in fear, I'm panicking about something, I'm like, oh, okay, God, remove this fear from me. It's because it's all fear-based, too. If you've ever done the steps, it all boils down to self-centered fear.
Fear and love.
Usually, I'm not going to get what I want. I'm afraid I'm going to lose something I got, or it's some kind of a fear of the unknown, but it's almost always things aren't going to go my way. And my higher power a lot of times goes, oh, Brian, are things not going your way again? Poor baby. And I know it, right? But my relapse prevention is staying connected, and taking suggestions. If my sponsor tells me, hey, maybe you ought to go write that down, I go write that down. I don't fight it anymore. I don't think that I know better anymore. One of my prayers is the set aside prayer. God, please enable me to set aside everything I think I know about myself, the 12 steps, the book, my illness, and you, so that I can have an open mind and a new experience. I want to be correctable. I want to be humble. I don't want to walk around thinking I know I got this. Oh, man, I got this is probably the most dangerous.
Oh, that's the worst. Yeah. My last residential treatment, they wouldn't even let you say those words.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't.
I got this.
You couldn't tell somebody else they got it. You couldn't say it yourself. None of that.
Dude, my first time going out of rehab, I said those words while I was high-fiving everyone around the living room, telling them, I'm Mr. AA, I got this.
I got this.
Yeah, 10 months later, I was
back if you could have gone back, you would have just been like, see you in 10 months. See you in 10 months, man. So last question is, what is the greatest gift you have gotten recently from recovery?
The other night, last week, my sister had asked me if I could help out with my nephews. She had to go into the office. She's been working remote from home and been able to take care of her kids, who are now 7 and 3, about to turn 4. And she asked me if I could help out. And I went and picked up my nephew from school, and I brought him home, and I opened the pool for his swim lesson, and then we got to hang out on the couch for a couple of hours after that. And I was sitting there, and he was laying in my arm, snuggled up on me, and we were watching some cartoon, and I can't believe my little sister trusts me with her kids, her most valued possession. She trusts me with, and not just that, we changed vehicles, so I drove her truck. to pick up her kid, and I sat there with my nephew just thinking how blessed I am to be able to do this, because right before I got sober was, so 7 years ago, my elder nephew is 7, right?
Yeah.
So just before I got sober, we had the whole family in the hospital. Everybody, it was the first kid, like the first natural born kid. I have my stepdaughter, but this is the first kid born in the family. Mm-hmm. So the whole family's there, and everybody's taking turn holding this newborn. And it gets to me, and it's my turn to hold my nephew. And I'm holding him, and all I can think about is when to go get loaded.
Mm.
I was jonesing, I was coming down, and I want to love right now, but I was physically incapable of feeling love to this my nephew that I'm holding in my arms, going, why can't I love you?
Don't know how to connect it.
I didn't know how to connect it, and all I could think about was I need to go get high. I need to go get loaded, and it was one of the bottom moments where I was like, I can't even fucking love my nephew,
right.
And so that brought that back as I was holding my other nephew, and then so that's earth people shit.
Right.
That's that earth people shit that we get to really sense and feel. And, my daughter's 16 now. She's learning how to drive, and I can be a good, responsible father for her. We have a car for her, which was a blessing that I wasn't able to have when I was growing up, and we just bought a travel trailer, and obviously material things are amazing. I have a comma in my bank account.
Wow.
What?
Right.
Man,
comma.
I have a comma in my bank account, bro. I love that one. I didn't for years. I didn't know what that looked like, unless rent was due, and it was only there for a few minutes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I didn't.
Long enough to give it away.
Now I have a couple of accounts with commas in them.
Right.
Sweet.
Well, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you very much. Great story. If you have any questions about today's show or anything else recovery related, please feel free to reach out in the comments section, Facebook, Instagram DMs, or email the Riches. You can find all that information in the episode description. And thank you to Brian.
Great job. Fantastic.
And to
job.
our
Thank
audience
you,
for being part of my sobriety today.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for giving us some of your time. We really hope you got something out of today's episode. We would be honored if you would like and share the episode or leave a review or comment with your takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe to tune into future episodes. Have a great day.